Most of us do not enjoy writing as much as we enjoy having written. Writing a paper can be a daunting task for many of us, which explains why some people break out in a cold sweat when they have to sit down and write a paper. In this lecture, I hope to give you some pointers and ideas that'll help you become a more productive writer. However, I have to warn you that even though a person may have the correct tools to do the job, those tools aren't valuable unless the person uses the tools. After many years of teaching, I've discovered that the student's greatest enemy is their inability to change. People fall into bad habits, habits they cannot change, or more truthfully, habits they will not change. It's easier for us to keep on doing things just like we've always done, but yet, for some freakish reason, we expect to get different results. If you're happy with your writing skills and your efficiency, then this is not the lecture for you. But if you want to know how you can be a more productive writer and how you can reduce the frustration in writing, then pick up your pen and paper because I'm going to give you some sound. Tried and true solutions that'll help you be a better and more productive writer. I believe that writing is the greatest invention that God has given to humankind. Without writing and the ability to read, technology would still be back in the Stone Ages. Our history would not be as accurate as we have today. And not to mention, we certainly wouldn't have computers or software programs that run the computers. But I think you'll agree that writing is one of the few things that will outlast you. I agree with the person that said, you either have to do something worth writing about to be remembered, or you have to write something worth reading. Writing is a way of discovering, a way of learning. This physical act of writing triggers the brain processes that lead you to make new connections among ideas, connections that you wouldn't have had just by thinking or talking about something. Writing is one of the greatest learning tools we have because many of the methods by which we learn are encapsulated in the act of writing. We learn by doing, and certainly writing is doing. We learn by hearing, and in writing we hear the words that we're writing in our mind. We learn by seeing, and when we write we see what we're writing. We see the words on the page. And of course we learn by talking things out. And when we're writing, we actually have this inner speech in our brain that processes and talks out the words that we're writing. So writing activates these unique mental pathways that enable you to pursue knowledge. It helps you to think through even complex concepts and gain a solid ownership of your words. Not to mention that writing is a way of sharing your knowledge. Most people do not remember specific classroom sessions or discussions, but nearly everyone recalls the topic of their research paper. Because when you write about a topic that you've thought about deeply, you become your own authority on the topic. So let's look at some of the ways that you can make the writing process better and easier for you as a writer. Number 1, start early. No one writes a masterpiece at one sitting. Even the best writers who get paid for good money for their writing, they'll tell you that it takes time to write something good. So the sooner you start your paper, the more time you'll have to allow it to marinate and process in your mind. And your brain needs that time to process your topic. And fortunately, once you start your paper, your brain will subconsciously begin working on ideas and processing those thoughts. So start early. This doesn't mean that you have to write your complete paper at one sitting. In fact, it's better if you don't do that. But allow yourself plenty of time to write your paper, and the job will be so much easier. Number 2, have a plan. Too many students sit down and randomly try to write their paper at one sitting. But you'll be far more productive, and I believe you'll use less time if you have a plan for your writing process. I'm certain that most of these ideas will work for you, but in the end, you have to come up with a process that you can repeat and use over and over. Even if your process is nothing more than a loose sense of purpose held in your mind and never written down. This thing that jazz musicians call a head arrangement. Head arrangements can work very well if you have the right kind of head and if you're thoroughly familiar with your subject. But sometimes all of us, and really most of us, require a more tangible plan, especially a plan that we can repeat for the next paper we write. And I promise you, there's a better process than just sitting down at the computer and to begin writing. So have a plan, which brings us to our next point. Point number 3, find a brainstorming method that works for you. Brainstorming should be the early part of the process. Naturally, brainstorming should be done at the outset. Even if you know your topic and if you know it well, it'll be better for you and it'll save you time if you sit down and use one of the brainstorming processes. There are many ways to brainstorm. Some people like to kick ideas back and forth with other people and then write them down. Some people like to make lists. I teach and promote that the best brainstorming method is to write by clustering or using a vein map. I believe this is the natural way to write because in this method, you're not inhibited by grammar or syntax or proper sentences or paragraph length. So many times when a person is writing, before they ever get to the end of the sentence, they realize they could have stated that sentence better, and they'll delete and go back and start all over. And that's not a good process. Educators say that brainstorming by the clustering method, that you'll actually come up with ideas that you would not have come up with in other methods. Because the clustering method allows thoughts to link to one another instead of sentences. And also this clustering method for brainstorming allows people to access both sides of their brain, whether you're a left brain learner or a right brain learner. This clustering method for brainstorming also helps you to record your thoughts more at the same speed that your brain works. Sometimes we have a thought and it might take us a couple minutes to write out that thought. With the clustering method, we can write down just one word or 2 words to encapsulate that thought. Because the brain is fluid, it's constantly changing. And just as no one can step into the same river twice, in the same manner, no one can think the same thought twice. For the act of thinking actually changes the thinking. We repel from writing because the very act of writing we think exposes our ignorance, our poor vocabulary, or shortcomings of our imagination. As one man said, writing seems to follow the straight line. But the straight line leads to the downfall of man. The straight line doesn't exist anywhere in nature. Any design undertaken with the straight line will be stillborn. And I agree with that. Clustering allows our thoughts to flow randomly. In whatever direction the thought process takes us, we can follow it and come back and correct it later. So let's take an example of clustering and let's look at it. For this example, we'll use Noah's Ark. Sometimes in the classroom, I'll ask students to use this exercise, and it seems to give them understanding of the clustering process. So our subject is going to be Noah's Ark, and our theme or thesis, which are technically 2 different things, but for now we'll just call it our theme. Our theme will be the ways in which Noah's Ark symbolizes the New Testament church. So first, I usually ask my students to write down anything that they know about Noah's Ark. Nothing is wrong. There's no wrong answers, but write down any item of significance, any idea, any thought about Noah's Ark. And they typically come up with something like this. Next, I ask them to cluster out more ideas and expand those ideas they have of how those ideas might represent something in the New Testament church. And after we do this for a few minutes, as a class, we typically come up with something that looks like this. And as you see, we have a lot of information here. Much more information than we want to write about. And I don't know if you're like me, but when I was in high school and the teacher would ask us to write an outline for our paper before we actually began writing it, and I just dreaded writing that outline because I wasn't any good at writing outlines. However, I've learned since I started using this clustering method that the outline usually writes itself. So you can see in our example here that if I take my pen and just randomly circle a few of these items, this could be my outline. Now, of course, I could pick and choose different nodules, different clustering sections to make the outline, but you see how that works. So the clustering method, as you can see, it's simple, it's easy, and I encourage you to use it for your own writing. After you've done your brainstorming, the next step would be to write the first draft. The key thing about writing the first draft is to not be inhibited by mistakes and flaws. When you're writing the first draft, do not worry about grammar. Do not worry about sentence fragments or run-ons. Just write and let the thoughts flow. There'll be some information that you'll have to insert into your draft. There'll be some that you'll have to take out. But for the first draft, the best thing is to use your outline as your guide and just let the thoughts flow. What if you get off of your outline? What if you go a different direction? Then that's perfectly all right. There might be something that you didn't think about when you were doing your brainstorming, and now it seems to fit perfectly, and that's okay. Just let your mind go where it wants to go. So write that first draft without inhibitions, without being bothered by inadequacies, or if you said things right, just write it and get it done. And then I suggest putting your rough draft away for several days. That's why you started earlier. Take a break from it, put it away, and those thoughts that you have will marinate in your mind. And when you come back to it several days later, first, you'll be more prepared to look at your story objectively, and you'll probably have more things to add to your paper. And in addition, you'll be able to recognize places in your rough draft that need fixed. So in the second draft, you would go back and try to rearrange and structure and organize. Sometimes I print my rough draft out, then use a pair of scissors to divide up sections and rearrange them. Something you had in your paper at the beginning, you might learn that it works better at the end, or vice versa. So for the second draft, you just worry about your structure. You're still not worried about the poor grammar, spelling errors, and etc., but you're just trying to get a solid structure, a solid foundation. And I might add here, most of the time, I don't worry about my introduction or my conclusion until after I've got the main part of the paper finished. The material that you gather for writing your paper might give you ideas for your introduction that you can use later on. So after you've written the first draft, you've come back and worked on your structure for the second draft. Again, it's best to put it away for a little while. Even if it's just a few hours, take a break, take a walk, work on something else, eat your lunch. But the more time you put between you and your last draft, the more easily you can recognize your mistakes. And on the third draft, start fixing your grammar mistakes and your sentence run-ons and your fragments. And once you've gotten through this third draft, then it's time to add your introduction. Many papers I receive as an instructor do not even have an introduction or a conclusion. Sometimes a poem will make a good introduction. Statistics might make a good introduction. A quote, a short story, an anecdote. All these make good introductions, and as I said, sometimes you won't find this material for your introduction until after you're finished with your first, second, or third draft. And the same goes for your conclusion. Your conclusion could be a recap or a summary, but usually we need more than that for a conclusion. Statistics, a poem, a short story, an illustration. All these would also work good for your conclusion. And then once you're finished with that draft, this is when you would put it away for the longest time. And then pull it out and try to fix every grammatical error that you missed before. Try to fix any typos. And certainly don't depend upon the computer to find all your typos and mistakes. And at some point, you want to have a good introductory sentence for your paper. Something catchy. And at some point, you want to come up with a good title. Regardless what size paper you're writing, even if it's a one page, it deserves a good title. The title is what gives the first impression. beyond the title is the first sentence. A good opening can make or break your paper. You want to let them know that this is going to be a valuable paper that they're reading. So work on that first line and have something good to say from the very outset. And one of the best things you can do as a writer is to find a friend that will read your paper and be honest with you. If you have a friend that reads your paper and just tells you nice things about your paper, they're not helping you at all. That's why you don't want to depend upon your mother to read it and give you feedback. But you have a valuable thing if you have a friend that will look you straight in the eye and say, "You're rambling in this part right here," or "This part doesn't make sense." And that's how we learn. We only learn by critique and criticism. That doesn't mean you have to take everyone's advice that critiques your paper. You may know more about writing than they do, but they're a reader, and if they're a reader, they're usually able to see holes in your paper, mistakes, and flaws. So find someone else to read your paper before you turn it in, and you'll do yourself a big favor. And that's the basic process I use for writing and the process that I teach my students. Again, you'll have to tailor it to fit your needs and find out what works for you. So we'll stop there, and I hope this has been helpful to you, and hopefully it'll give you some ideas to help improve your efficiency for your writing.